This is a graph of Christianity in America. Looking at it, you'll notice that after decades of steady decline, the percentage of people who identify as Christian has started to level out. Back in the 1990s, nearly 90% of US adults identified with some form of Christianity, and yet by 2024, that number dropped to just 63%. It's been the biggest decline in modern US history. Yet, since 2019, that number of Christians has held relatively steady, hovering between 60 and 64%. Sometimes even ticking up. So what's going on here? Why has this continuous decline of Christianity suddenly slowed? Well, like any religious revival, there are many reasons. But to start, I think we have to go back to a time when being Christian was a key part of what it meant to be an American. From the very beginning, before America was even founded, when the Pilgrims landed in 1620, they weren't just escaping persecution in England. They were trying to build something new, a society where they could live freely according to their faith. To them, religion wasn't just private devotion. It was the blueprint for how a community should live, govern, and even think. A decade later, the Puritans in particular carried this vision even further, determined to shape the new world around their religious ideals, a conviction that would echo far beyond their small colonies and into the moral foundations of the United States itself. As then Massachusetts Governor John Winthrop famously put it, they sought to build a city upon a hill, a model Christian society meant to serve as a moral example to the world. Then things started to change. You see, while the original Puritan settlers were a devoutly religious bunch, their grandchildren and great-grandchildren, those born in the New World, didn't always share the same intensity of belief. For many, religion began to feel more like a burden than a conviction, something inherited rather than chosen. As time went on, economic prosperity became a bigger priority, and religion was becoming increasingly institutionalized. Church attendance declined, not necessarily because people stopped believing in God, but because worship had started to feel cold, intellectual, and too closely tied to social status and wealth. People were craving something more, a deeper, more heartfelt, authentic connection with God. That longing is what gave rise to the Great Awakenings, a series of religious revivals during the 18th and 19th centuries. Religion began to move out of the formal church and into open fields, homes, and public squares. Preachers like George Whitefield and Charles Finney rejected rigid church hierarchy in favor of a personal religious experience. Salvation was no longer mediated by the state or even by the church itself. It became something you felt. You didn't have to sit in a church every Sunday to call yourself Christian anymore. The Great Awakenings reinvigorated Christianity in a way that democratized it, making faith accessible to ordinary people regardless of class, education, or social background. And it worked. Now you may be thinking, if Christianity was such a big part of life back then, wouldn't it have made its way into the Constitution? And you'd be right. Christian morals did help shape the culture, but when it came to drafting the actual blueprint for the government, the Founding Fathers made the choice to keep religion out of it, despite nearly all of them identifying as Christians themselves. While they were shaped by Christian morals, they were also students of the Enlightenment. After all, they had just fought a war against a country where the head of the state was also the head of the church. They were well aware of Europe's long history of sectarian conflict, much of which had driven their ancestors to American shores in the first place. To them, mixing religion with politics wasn't just dangerous, it was a recipe for disaster. Their solution was to separate Christianity from the state, so God was kept out of the Constitution. And yet, keeping religion out of the Constitution didn't mean keeping it out of American life. Christianity remained the dominant moral framework for most people, and it did so fairly consistently for centuries, peaking in the 1950s with its highest rate of Americans identifying as Christians at over 95%, church membership at around 75%, with almost half of the country attending church regularly. But afterwards, things started to change, and Christianity slowly began to decline. The civil rights movement exposed hypocrisy in churches that preached love yet tolerated segregation. The Vietnam War caused internal division within churches based on pro-war and anti-war lines, leading to the rise of the Christian right, which we'll obviously get into soon. And then just the overall counterculture movement of the 60s, which was really a rebellion against all authority, leading to the rise of personal spirituality, social revolutions, and liberalism, all affected the church negatively. Overall scientific advancement in the background of all this didn't help either. As society modernized, it naturally became more secular. This led to a decline in Christianity in America between, say, 1960 and 1990. But it wasn't a massive shift, at least not yet. It was from the 90s onwards that we really started to see a rapid decline. The first was the fall of the Soviet Union. See, for the longest time, during the Cold War, Christianity was being used as a symbol of national identity, in contrast to the atheist ideology of the Soviet Union. After they fell, people became more comfortable with admitting to be secular, rather than deal with some McCarthyism-type ostracization. But that being said, it's here we get to the modern day, and there's quite a few more reasons now. There was the birth of the internet, which was massive. People began being able to communicate more outside of their local bubbles. You were able to read other people's worldviews, ask taboo questions, and find like-minded people beyond your own hometown bubble, even if they didn't fit their local church culture. In the early 2000s is when the church child abuse scandals, particularly in the Catholic Church, started becoming a national issue. Don't get me wrong, there were scandals beforehand, but in the year 2002, a major expose by the Boston Globe exposing widespread abuse within the Archdiocese of Boston and a systematic, decades-long cover-up by church officials was a major turning point. As time went on, it unleashed a floodgate of investigations and allegations nationwide, in every state. It's hard to overstate how deeply these types of news shook Christians across the country, especially Catholics, who had been raised to trust clergy as moral authorities. For many, this was the moment their faith in the institution broke, and a lot of them stopped going to church altogether. By the way, all these reasons are relevant to why Christianity in Europe has been declining as well. Lastly, there's been a massive fusion of Christianity with conservative politics lately that just can't be ignored. I know I mentioned the Christian right a bit earlier, which has been a thing since the late 70s, but this is a bit different. Now, at this point, I already know I'm getting into some highly controversial territory by talking about this on YouTube, but bear with me as I try to make this as neutral as possible. Since President Donald Trump's ascension to politics, he's used the language of Christianity to not just win votes, but to reshape what American patriotism means, and even used it to redefine national identity itself. This is especially visible in the strong support Trump has received from white evangelical Protestants. In 2024, 85% voted for him, and 60% even believe God ordained him to win the election. The Republican Party has never been more intertwined with Christianity than it is now. From the creation of the White House Faith Office, an executive order for an anti-Christian bias task force, countless rallies framing America as a Christian nation, and Trump, among others, claiming to be the defenders of Christianity. His 2024 election campaign was even characterized as against atheists, globalists, and the Marxists. To many, it can be said that Trump's MAGA movement has utilized, or should I say hijacked, Christianity to gain votes. The ever-increasing intensity for Christianity has turned into what's been called Christian nationalism, which asserts that the US is a country founded by and for Christians. Many members of Congress have expressed support for this ideology or are closely tied to those who do. Again, I'm just here to explain the situation. In America's historically divided political climate today, many Christians see the MAGA movement as representing everything Christianity would be against, such as hostility towards marginalized groups, a focus on dominance over humility or compassion, glorification of power, and not helping the less fortunate. Both Pope Francis and Leo XIV have even talked about it. Yet despite this, they've become extremely tied together. It's led to many Americans becoming disillusioned with Christianity altogether, or at least America's version of it. For example, back in 2007, Pew Research Center found that nearly 2/3 of those who were politically liberal were also Christian. Now that number's dropped to just over 1/3. But at the same time as all this, if we want to talk about why Christianity has stabilized recently, this fusion with politics is unironically also the reason, which I'll explain in a bit. But first, where are all these former Christians going? Well, if Christianity is shrinking, then that means at least one other group has to be growing. And that group on the rise is the religiously unaffiliated, otherwise known as the religious nones. And no, not those nuns. These are people who identify as atheists, agnostics, or simply as nothing in particular. And today, they make up nearly 29% of the US population. Young adults between the ages of 18 and 24 make up the majority of this group, with 43% in that age range identifying as nuns. Along with this, there's also been a rise in religious switching. Millions of Americans have changed their religion at some point in their lives. Let me explain. Today, about 35% of people say they now identify with a different religion than the one they were raised in. For example, these are people who grew up Catholic and now identify as Protestant, or someone raised with no religion at all who now identifies as Muslim. And because of this switching, Christianity has taken the biggest hit. For every one person who converts to Christianity, 6 people leave it. So now finally, amidst this, why has Christianity stabilized? Well, like I said, the fusion of it with politics, which has disillusioned many Christians, has also brought in many new believers. Let me explain. Many young people have turned to religion to find community and connection, especially after the isolating years of the pandemic, which hit Gen Z harder than most. This is part of a bigger issue though. It relates to the world being in turmoil, the cost of living crisis, geopolitical conflicts, climate change, social unrest, weakened institutions. Basically, everything is in chaos right now. And a world in chaos is one in which people start yearning for the comfort of tradition. But what is traditionalism usually tied to? Well, conservatism, which today is largely defined by the MAGA movement. So if you're a young person these days who identifies as conservative, then being Christian is part of that more than ever. Christianity has become a form of rebellion against a postmodern culture, one built on the idea that nothing is sacred and nothing matters. People want to feel like there's a meaning to their life and have some order in the world. And as we know, many young men in particular have been turning to the Republican Party, for many reasons like the ones above, but also due to social disenfranchisement. So in turn, they're becoming Christian. It's funny because historically, it's always been women who have been more religious. Yet now within Gen Z, almost 40% of women now describe themselves as religiously unaffiliated, compared with 34% of men. In every other age group, men were more likely to be unaffiliated. I guess I'm saying all this to say there's now a very effective religious pipeline happening in younger generations. But then again, America's Christian decline has only stabilized, not increased. Christianity has become more powerful, more of a brand, but not all that much more popular. So what does all this actually mean? It means Christianity still matters, not because most Americans are deeply devout, but because faith has become one of the last big cultural dividing lines. The question for now isn't whether Christianity will disappear, but what version of it will dominate America's future. It does still seem like it's headed for decline though. While 80% of older Americans still identify as Christian, only 46% of millennials and Gen Z do. It's only even this high still because of immigration, which is another factor in this. See, while Christianity is declining in the West, it's extremely relevant in Latin America, where most immigrants come from. According to Pew Research data, 58% of US immigrants are Christian, but in the past, this number used to be even higher. In 2011, that number was 83%. These are people who are actually culturally Christian, and they've no doubt been contributing to keeping Christianity alive in America. But again, even taking this into account, Christianity still has been declining, so the stabilization won't last long as time goes by. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to check out these videos to see why the US South in particular is so religious, and this one on why Christianity is so divided. I'll see you in the next one.